The alarm bell rang through the mining tunnels at exactly 6 in the morning, just like it had every day for the past 5 years. Kim-tae opened his eyes in the darkness of his small room and listened to the familiar sound echo off the metal walls. Around him, he could hear the other human workers starting to move, their feet hitting the cold floor as they prepared for another day in the mines. Tae sat up slowly and rubbed his eyes. His room was tiny, barely big enough for a narrow bed and a small table. The walls were made of cheap metal sheets that creaked when the wind blew outside. A single light bulb hung from the ceiling, casting harsh shadows when he turned it on. This place had been his home for 5 years, but it still felt like a prison. He dressed quickly in his work clothes. The blue jumpsuit was worn and patched in several places, but it was clean. Tae always kept his clothes clean, even when everyone else looked like they had been rolling in dirt. He pulled on his heavy work boots and grabbed his tool bag from the table. The bag was old, but well organized, with every tool in its proper place. Outside his room, the corridor was filled with other workers heading to the dining hall. Tae recognized all of them. There was Park Min, a big man with kind eyes, who always tried to make jokes even when things were bad. Lee Hannah walked beside him, her short black hair messy from sleep. She was the smartest person in the colony after Tae, though she did not know that. Behind them came Choi Young, barely 20 years old and still homesick for Earth even after 2 years on this planet. "Morning, Tae," Park Min called out as he passed. "Another beautiful day in paradise, right?" Tae nodded, but did not speak. He never spoke unless he had to. The others had learned this about him years ago and stopped trying to pull him into conversations. They thought he was just shy, or maybe a little strange. They had no idea that he stayed quiet for very different reasons. The dining hall was a large room with long metal tables and benches. The walls were covered with safety posters in 3 languages: English for the humans, Vorthok script for the alien overseers, and Basic Galactic for any visiting traders. Most of the posters were old and faded, talking about proper mining procedures and emergency protocols that everyone had memorized. Years ago, Tae got his breakfast from the food machine and found an empty spot at the end of a table. The food was not good, but it was nutritious enough to keep them working. He ate quickly and quietly while listening to the conversations around him. The other workers talked about the same things every morning: the weather, the work schedule, complaints about the equipment, and dreams of saving enough money to leave this place. "The drill in Section 7 is making that noise again," Lee Hannah was saying to Park Min. "I think the bearing is going bad. I told the overseers about it last week," Park Min replied. "They said it was not important enough to fix yet." Tae knew about the drill in Section 7. He had heard the noise 3 days ago when he was working on the air recycling system nearby. The bearing was definitely failing, but it would probably last another month if they were careful. He could fix it in 2 hours if they gave him the right parts. But the Vorthok overseers never asked for his opinion on anything except basic repairs. After breakfast, all the workers gathered in the main assembly area. This was a huge room carved out of the planet's rock, with a high ceiling and walls lined with mining equipment. The air always smelled of metal and machine oil. Bright lights hung from cables overhead, casting everything in a harsh white glow. Overseer Cleth stood at the front of the room on a raised platform. He was 8 feet tall and looked like a giant insect walking on 2 legs. His skin was dark, green and shiny, like armor plating. 4 arms extended from his body, each ending in hands with too many fingers. His head was triangular, with large compound eyes that seemed to see everything at once. When he spoke, his voice came out as a series of clicks and buzzes that the translation devices turned into words. "Today's work assignments," Cleth announced, his mechanical voice echoing through the room. "Mining teams 1 through 6 will continue. Extraction in the deep tunnels. Processing teams will handle the morning shipment of quantum crystals. Maintenance crews will focus on the water recycling systems." Tae waited for his name to be called. He was always assigned to maintenance, usually. Working alone in the deep parts of the facility where the important systems were located, the Vorthok had learned that he was good at fixing things, but they had never asked how he had learned to be so good at it. Kim-tae Cleth's voice clicked. "You will repair the atmospheric processors in sections 12 through 15. The humidity levels are incorrect." Tae nodded and picked up his tool bag. He had expected this assignment. He had noticed the humidity problem 2 days ago when he was working on the power grid nearby. The atmospheric processors were complex machines that kept the air breathable for humans. Most mechanics would need a full day to diagnose the problem and another day to fix it. Tay knew he could have it working properly in 4 hours. As the workers dispersed to their jobs, Tay made his way through the maze of corridors that led to the deep sections of the facility. The tunnels here were older and quieter, carved out of solid rock when the colony was first established. Emergency lights provided just enough illumination to see where he was going. The air was cooler here, and he could hear the distant hum of machinery keeping the colony alive. Section 12 was at the end of a long corridor. The atmospheric processor was a machine the size of a small building, with pipes and cables running in all directions. Tay set down his tool bag and walked around the machine, listening to the sounds it made. Most people would have started by checking the diagnostic screens, but Tay had learned long ago that machines told you more with their sounds than their computers ever could. The main pump was running too fast, which meant the pressure sensors were giving incorrect readings. He traced the sensor cables back to their source and found what he expected: corrosion in the connections. It was a simple problem with a simple solution. But it would have taken most mechanics hours to find out. As he worked, Tay let his mind wander. This was when he felt most comfortable, when his hands were busy and his brain could focus on the familiar challenge of making broken things work again. He had always been good at this, even as a child on Earth. His parents had been amazed when he fixed their household appliances without reading the manuals. His teachers had called him gifted and talked about special schools and advanced programs. But that was a long time ago, before everything went wrong. Before the accident that changed his life forever, Tay finished the repair and tested the system. The atmospheric processor hummed contentedly, its readings now showing normal humidity levels throughout sections 12 through 15. He packed up his tools and moved on to the next section, where a different problem waited for him. The day passed like all the others. Tay worked alone, fixing the machines that kept the colony running. He spoke only when necessary, answering questions with short, precise responses. The other workers respected his skills but gave him space. Understanding that he preferred to be left alone as evening approached, Tay finished his last repair and headed back to the main facility. The corridors were busier now, filled with workers ending their shifts. The air was thick with the smell of tired bodies and industrial lubricants. Conversations echoed off the metal walls, a mixture of complaints about the work and plans for the few hours of free time they had each day. Tay ate dinner quickly and returned to his room. But instead of going to sleep like most of the other workers, he climbed a maintenance ladder that led to the upper levels of the facility. Few people came up here, where the communication equipment and environmental controls were located. It was quiet and dark, lit only by the glow of status lights and the stars visible through small windows. He made his way to the highest point in the colony, a small observation deck that had been built for monitoring the mining operations. During the day, it offered a view of the rocky landscape and the distant mountains, but at night it became something else entirely. From here, Tay could see the stars. He stood at the edge of the deck and looked up at the night sky. The planet had no moon, so the stars were brilliant and clear. He could see the familiar constellations, the same ones he had memorized as a child on Earth. But he could also see things that most people missed: the faint glow of distant nebulae, the moving lights of spacecraft in orbit, the subtle variations in stellar brightness that told stories of distant worlds. Tay had been coming up here every night for 5 years, but he never got tired of the view. The stars reminded him of who he used to be before he came to this place, before he decided that the safest thing to do was stay quiet and invisible. He stayed on the observation deck for an hour, watching the slow movement of the stars across the sky. In the distance, he could see the lights of the Vorthok Administrative buildings where Overseer Cleth and his staff planned the next day's work. They probably thought all the humans were asleep by now, tired from their day of simple labor. They had no idea that one of those humans was standing under the stars, remembering things that could change everything. Finally, Tay made his way back down to his room. Tomorrow would be another day of repairs and maintenance, another day of staying quiet and invisible. But as he lay in his narrow bed, he could still see the stars in his mind, and he could still remember what it felt like to fly among them. The alarm would ring again in 6 hours, and another day would begin. But for now, Kim Tae closed his eyes and dreamed of the vast darkness between the stars, where he had once been more than just a silent mechanic on a forgotten world. The first sign that something was wrong came during the morning shift change. Tae was walking through the main corridor when the lights flickered and went out for 3 seconds. Emergency power kicked in, bathing everything in red light before the main systems came back online. The other workers looked around nervously. But incidents like this happened sometimes on mining worlds, where the power grid was. He had heard the distinct sound of the main communications array powering up to maximum strength just before the lights went out. Someone had just received or sent a very powerful transmission, something that required more energy than the normal daily communications with the transport ships and supply convoys. At the morning assembly, Overseer Cleth seemed different. His usual clicking speech was faster, and his compound eyes kept looking toward the ceiling as if he expected something to appear there. He gave out the work assignments quickly, without his normal complaints about human inefficiency. All mining operations will continue as scheduled, Cleth announced. There will be no changes to the daily routine. No worker is to access the communication systems without direct authorization. The last part was unusual. Workers were never allowed to use the communication systems anyway, so why mention it specifically? Tae noticed that several other humans were also looking puzzled by the announcement. Kim Tae, Cleth called out, you will work on the power distribution system in the lower levels today. The energy readings have been irregular. This was also strange. Tae had checked the power distribution system just 3 days ago, and everything had been working perfectly. But he nodded and picked up his tool bag without asking questions. As the workers dispersed, Tae made his way to the lower levels. But instead of going directly to the power distribution center, he took a detour through the maintenance tunnels. These narrow passages ran parallel to the main corridors and were used for accessing pipes and cables. Most people avoided them because they were cramped and poorly lit. But Tae had explored every tunnel in the facility. During his 5 years here, he made his way to a section that ran directly under the main communication center. The walls here were thinner, and if he pressed his ear against the metal, he could sometimes hear conversations from the room above. It was not exactly eavesdropping, he told himself. Above were speaking in the Vorthok language, which the translation devices could not pick up clearly through the metal walls. But Tae had learned enough of their clicking speech over the years to understand basic concepts. They were talking about a ship, something large and damaged. The word for danger came up several times, along with something that sounded like many deaths. Tae pressed his ear closer to the wall. One of the voices was definitely Cleth, but there were others he did not recognize. They seemed to be arguing about something. With Cleth's voice getting higher and more agitated, then he heard something that made his blood run cold. Mixed in with the Vorthok clicking was a human voice, speaking in accented basic galactic. Voice was talking about pilot certification and emergency protocols. Someone was asking for help, and they specifically needed human pilots. Tae moved away from the wall and continued to the power distribution center. His hands were shaking slightly. As he opened his tool bag after 5 years of quiet routine, the outside galaxy had suddenly reached into his small world. Someone out there needed pilots, and they had come to this forgotten mining planet looking for help. He tried to focus on his work, but his mind kept returning to the conversation he had overheard. The Vorthok were clearly discussing some kind of emergency, but they had no intention of involving the human workers. To them, the miners were just laborers, useful for repairing equipment, but incapable of anything more complex. The day dragged on slowly. Tae completed his assigned tasks, but every sound made him look up, expecting to hear more about the mysterious ship. During his lunch break, he noticed that the other workers were also acting strangely. Lee Hanna kept glancing at the ceiling, and Parkman was unusually quiet. Did anyone else notice the power fluctuation this morning? Choi Young asked quietly. Yeah, Lee Hanna replied. And did you see how nervous Cleth was during the assembly? Something's definitely going on. Maybe it's just another inspection, Parkman suggested. You know how the overseers get when the district administrators come around. But Tae could see that none of them really believed that explanation. They had all been on the planet long enough to recognize when something was genuinely different. That evening, Tae made his way to the observation deck earlier than usual. He was looking for signs of activity in orbit around the planet, At first, he saw nothing unusual. The normal pattern of navigation lights marked the positions of the automated mining platforms and communication satellites. But as the sky grew darker, he noticed something that made him catch his breath. There, just above the horizon, was a cluster of lights that had not been there the night before. They were too bright to be stars and too organized to be natural phenomena. Tay counted at least dozens separate light sources, all moving in the same direction at the same speed. It was a fleet of ships, and they were in orbit around the planet. Tay watched the lights for over an hour, tracking their movement across the sky. The formation was maintaining a standard defensive pattern, which meant they were military vessels, but there was something wrong with their movement. One of the ships was clearly struggling, its path less steady than the others. He was so focused on the ships that he almost missed the sound of footsteps on the metal stairs behind him. Tay turned around quickly, expecting to see one of the maintenance workers coming up to check on the communication equipment. Instead, he found himself face to face with Lihanna. "I thought I might find you up here," she said softly. "You come up here every night, don't you?" Tay nodded but did not speak. He was not sure how to explain what he had been doing or what he had discovered. "I've been watching too," Lihanna continued, looking up at the sky. "Those lights weren't there yesterday, and the way Cleeth was acting this morning. ... Something big is happening, isn't it?" "Yes," Tay said. It was the first word he had spoken to another human in 3 days. Lihanna looked surprised to hear his voice, but she did not comment on it. Instead, she pointed at the cluster of lights above them. "What do you think they want?" she asked. Tay was quiet for a moment, thinking about the conversation he had overheard and the desperate voice asking for pilots' help. He said finally, "Help? With what?" But before Tay could answer, the lights in the sky suddenly changed. The unsteady ship in the formation, even from this distance, it was clear that something was seriously wrong. "Look," Lihanna whispered, pointing at the sky. As they watched, a new light appeared near the struggling ship. It was smaller and brighter, moving quickly toward the planet's surface. After a few seconds, they could see that it was some kind of shuttle or transport vessel heading directly for the mining colony. "They're coming here," Lihanna said, her voice filled with a mixture of fear and excitement. Tay watched the approaching shuttle and felt something stirring inside him that he had not felt in 5 years. It was a familiar sensation, like a sleeping part of his mind suddenly waking up. His hands stopped shaking, and his breathing became steady and controlled. Somewhere up there, people were in trouble. They had come to this small mining world because they needed help, and the Vorthok were probably going to turn them away. The alien overseers could not understand that humans were capable of more than simple manual labor. But Tay knew the truth. He knew exactly what those ships were and what kind of help they needed. And for the first time in 5 years, he was thinking about breaking his silence. The shuttle disappeared behind the mountains, heading for the main landing pad on the other side of the colony. Within minutes, alarms began to sound throughout the facility, not the normal work alarms, but the emergency signals that meant all workers should return to their quarters immediately. "We should go," Lihanna said nervously. Tay nodded, but he did not move. He stood on the observation deck, looking up at the struggling ship in orbit, and made a decision that would change everything. Tomorrow, he would have to speak up. Tomorrow, he would have to tell them who he really was. The silent mechanic's 5 years of hiding were about to come to an end. The morning assembly was different from any other in the 5 years since Tay had arrived on the planet. Overseer Cleth stood at the front of the room, but he was not alone. Beside him stood a creature that none of the humans had ever seen before. The alien was tall and thin, with 4 arms and skin that looked like it was made of green scales. Its head was long and narrow, with large yellow eyes that seemed to look in different directions at the same time. When it moved, it did so with quick, jerky motions that reminded Tay of a lizard he had once seen on Earth. "This is Commander Edix of the Galactic Federation," Cleth announced, his mechanical voice more irritated than usual. "He is requested to speak with all human workers. You will answer his questions truthfully and completely." The human workers looked at each other nervously. Most of them had never seen a Federation officer before, and they were not sure what to expect. Commander Urix stepped forward and began to speak. His voice was harsh and crackling, like static from a broken radio. The translation device on his chest turned his words into basic galactic that they could understand. I am looking for pilots, he said, his yellow eyes scanning the group of humans. My ship is damaged, and we need someone who can fly it. Do any of you have pilot training? The humans looked around at each other uncertainly. Parkman raised his hand hesitantly. I can fly cargo haulers, he said, small ones, for moving supplies between the mining platforms. Commander Yerkes' eyes focused on him. What is your certification level? Basic atmospheric flight only, Parkman admitted. The commander's expression showed his disappointment. Anyone else? Lehanna spoke up. I know navigation. I can read star charts and plot courses. Have you ever piloted a vessel? No, sir. Only navigation. Choi Young raised his hand. I understand engines. Commander Yerkes was becoming more frustrated with each answer. I need pilots, not mechanics. People who can actually fly ships. Large ships, military vessels. The room fell silent. The humans all looked at the floor, embarrassed that they could not help. Tay stood at the back of the group, watching the scene unfold. His heart was beating faster than usual, and his hands were starting to shake again. This is useless, Commander Yerkes said to Overseer Cleth. These are just laborers. They cannot help us. I told you this would be a waste of time. Cleth replied with satisfaction. Humans are good for simple work, but they are not capable of complex tasks like piloting Federation vessels. Everyone turned to look at T. He had spoken so softly that several people were not sure they had heard him correctly. The room was completely silent except for the hum of the ventilation system. Tay took a deep breath and stepped forward. I said, I can fly it. Your ship. I can pilot it. Parkman stared at him in shock. Tay, what are you talking about? You're a mechanic. You fix air recyclers and power systems. You've never mentioned anything about flying. Commander Yerkes looked skeptical. You claim to be a pilot? What is your training? But now, with a damaged Federation ship in orbit and people in danger, he could not stay silent anymore. Serial number TDF 774, 9 Alpha. I am certified to pilot all classes of Federation vessels, from fighter craft to dreadnought battleships. The silence that followed was so complete that Tay could hear his own heartbeat. Every person in the room was staring at him, as if he had just claimed to be able to fly without a ship. That's impossible, Parkman whispered. You're a mechanic, Choi Young said, confusion clear in his voice. You work on broken machines. Force officer. Here on a mining world. Former officer, Tay corrected. I resigned my commission 5 years ago. Why would a TDF officer resign to work in a mine? Personal reasons, he said finally. This is ridiculous. Overseer, Cleth interrupted, his voice full of clicking anger. This human has been working as a maintenance worker for 5 years. He repairs simple machines. He is clearly lying to make himself seem important. But Commander Yerkes was not convinced. He had served in the Federation military long enough to recognize something in Tay's posture and the way he spoke. There was a precision in his words and a steadiness in his gaze that reminded the commander of the professional pilots he had known. What class of ship is the Stellar Dawn? Commander Yerkes asked suddenly. Sovereign-class heavy cruiser, Tay replied immediately. Crew capacity, 50,000. Primary armament, quantum torpedo arrays, powered by dual fusion cores with backup antimatter generators. The commander's eyes widened. How do you know that? Because I've flown ships like it before, Tay said simply. The TDF used modified Sovereign-class vessels as command ships. I was qualified on the Soul's Pride, which was the same basic design. The Soul's Pride was destroyed 5 years ago, Commander Yerkes said carefully. All hands were lost. Not all hands, Tay said quietly. I was the only survivor. The weight of this revelation settled over the room like a heavy blanket. Their machines, and never spoke unless spoken to, was actually a military officer who had survived the destruction of a Federation warship. Lehanna was the first to find her voice. Tay, is this true? Parkman asked. Because I didn't want to remember, Tay replied. I came here to forget about ships and space and everything that happened out there. I thought if I stayed quiet and kept my head down, the past would leave me alone. To pilot Federation vessels, then you know that anyone can claim to have military training. I need proof before I risk 50,000 lives. What kind of proof? Tay asked. A demonstration. My shuttle is in the landing bay. If you can pilot it successfully, then I will believe your claims. Tay felt a familiar stirring in his chest, something he had not experienced in 5 years. It was the feeling he used to get before climbing into a cockpit, a mixture of excitement and calm focus that meant he was about to do what he was born to do. "All right," he said. "I'll show you." As they moved toward the landing bay, the other workers followed behind in stunned silence. Parkman walked beside Lee Hanna, shaking his head in disbelief. 5 years, he whispered. 5 years we've been working next to him, and we never knew. How were we supposed to know he was a starship pilot? Maybe that's why he was so good at fixing things, Lee Hanna suggested. If you understand how ships work, regular machines must seem simple. Overseer Cleth walked behind the group, his compound eyes fixed on Tay's back. Now he was learning that one of his workers was a trained military officer, someone who possessed skills that the Vorthok could barely comprehend. The landing bay was a large open space with a high ceiling and thick metal doors that could seal against the vacuum of space. In the center of the bay sat Commander Yerkes' shuttle, a sleek vessel with smooth curves and no visible weapons. "This is a Federation scout ship," Commander Yerkes explained as they approached the vessel. "It is fast and difficult to control. Most pilots require extensive training before they can fly it safely." Tay walked around the shuttle, examining its hull and engine configuration. The engine placement, the control surface layout, the way the hull was shaped to reduce sensor visibility, it all made sense to him in a way that was almost instinctive. 5 years, 4 months, and 16 days. Tay replied without hesitation. "Are you nervous?" Tay looked up at the shuttle and felt the last of his doubts fade away. "No," he said, "I'm ready." Tay climbed into the pilot seat of the Federation shuttle and immediately felt like he was coming home. The cockpit was different from the ships he had flown before, but the basic layout was familiar. Flight controls to his left and right, navigation displays in front of him, engine status indicators along the top of the console. His hands moved automatically to the correct positions, even before he consciously thought about what he was doing. "Commander." Yerkes settled into the co-pilot's seat beside him, his 4 arms working quickly to activate the monitoring systems. "I will be watching everything you do," he warned. "One mistake, and I take control immediately." "Understood," Tay replied, his voice calm and focused. Outside the shuttle, the other humans pressed against the landing bay windows to watch. Parkman had his face pressed against the glass, still trying to understand how the quiet mechanic he had known for 5 years was about to pilot an advanced Federation vessel. Lee Hanna stood beside him, her eyes wide with amazement and worry. "Pre-flight check," Tay said, more to himself than to Commander Yerkes. His hands moved across the control panels with smooth efficiency, checking systems in a sequence that looked almost like a dance. Engines warming up, navigation systems online, life support stable, communications clear. Commander Yerkes watched in growing surprise. Most pilots took 15 or 20 minutes to complete a pre-flight check on an unfamiliar ship. Tay was moving through the procedures as if he had been flying this exact shuttle for years. "How do you know the system layout so well?" the commander asked. "Federation ships follow standard design principles," Tay explained while continuing his checks. "Once you understand the logic behind the controls, you can adapt to any vessel quickly." The engines came online with a low humming sound that grew steadily louder. Tay's hands moved to the flight controls, and the shuttle lifted smoothly off the landing bay floor. There was no jerking or sudden movements, just a steady rise that felt as natural as breathing. "Take us outside," Commander Yerkes instructed. "Circle the mining facility once, then return to the landing bay," separated the landing bay from the outside environment. The rocky landscape of the mining world spread out below them, with the mountains rising in the distance and the main facility. To do something that made Commander Yerkes grip his seat, he dropped the shuttle into a steep dive toward the rocky ground, then pulled up at the last possible second, skimming just meters above the surface. The ship banked left and right, weaving between the mining towers and equipment with precision. That seemed impossible. "What are you doing?" Commander Yerkes shouted, his yellow eyes wide with alarm. "Testing the response time and maneuverability characteristics." Tay replied calmly, pulling the shuttle into a vertical climb that pushed both of them back into their seats. "This ship handles better than the specifications suggested. The engine ratio is excellent, and the control surfaces are more responsive than standard Federation design." At the top of the climb, Tay rolled the shuttle inverted and began a spiraling descent that would have made most pilots sick, Commander Yerkes realized. He was watching something extraordinary. How are you compensating for the atmospheric density variations? Experience, Tay replied. Every planet has different air pressure and wind patterns. You learn to feel how the ship wants to move and work with it instead of fighting it. They approached the asteroid field that surrounded the planet, and Commander Yerkes expected Tay to turn back toward the landing bay. Instead, the human pilot accelerated toward the floating rocks. This is not part of the test, Commander Yerkes warned. I know, Tay said, but your ship in orbit is damaged. If you need to evacuate people or transfer supplies, you'll have to navigate through this field multiple times. I'm showing you that it can be done safely. What followed was a demonstration of piloting skill that Commander Yerkes would remember for the rest of his life. Tay guided the shuttle between asteroids that were separated by only meters, adjusting his course constantly to account for the irregular rotation of the rocks. The ship moved like it was alive, responding to threats before they became dangerous. Impossible, Commander Yerkes whispered, watching the navigation display show their path through the asteroid field. The computers say there is no safe route through this section. Computers calculate probabilities, Tay explained, banking sharply to avoid a chunk of rock the size of a building, but they don't account for pilot intuition or real-time adjustments. Sometimes you have to trust your instincts more than your instruments. They emerged from the asteroid field and began the return journey to the mining facility. But Tay was not finished demonstrating his abilities. He began a series of combat maneuvers, rolling and diving and accelerating in patterns that were designed to evade enemy fire. Where did you learn to fly like this? Commander Yerkes asked, his voice filled with awe. The hard way, Tay replied quietly. In combat, against enemies who were trying to kill me and my crew, you learn fast when your life depends on it. As they approached the landing bay, Tay performed one final maneuver that left Commander Yerkes speechless. He brought the shuttle in at a steep angle and high speed, then somehow managed to slow down and level off at exactly the right moment to land gently in the center of the bay, smoothly that they barely felt the impact. Tay shut down the engines and turned to look at Commander Yerkes. Was that sufficient proof? He asked. The commander was quiet for a long moment, staring at the flight data on his instruments. Finally, he spoke. I have been flying for 27 years, he said slowly. I have seen pilots from 12 different species, including some of the best in the Federation fleet. What you just did should not be possible. It was a simple test flight, Tay replied. Simple. Commander Yerkes shook his head. And you did it perfectly, without hesitation or error. They climbed out of the shuttle to find the landing bay filled with people. The human workers were there, along with several Vorthok officials who had come to see what the commotion was about. Overseer Cleth stood at the front of the group, his compound eyes reflecting a mixture of shock and confusion. Admiral Voss's voice came through the communication system, transmitted from the damaged cruiser in orbit. Commander Yerkes, report. How did the test flight proceed? Commander Yerkes activated his personal communicator. Admiral, I have found our pilot. This human is not just qualified to fly Federation vessels. He may be the most skilled pilot I have ever encountered. Are you certain? The Admiral's voice asked. Completely certain. We need to bring him aboard the Stellar Dawn immediately. Park. Min pushed forward through the crowd, still trying to process what he had witnessed. Tay, that was incredible. Where did you learn to fly like that? Military training, Tay replied simply. But you've been fixing our machines for 5 years, Lihana said. Why didn't you ever mention that you could do something like this? Tay looked up at the ceiling of the landing bay, toward the stars where the damaged Federation ship was waiting. Because I thought I was done with flying, he said. I thought I could leave that part of my life behind. And now, Commander Yerkes, asked Tay, was quiet for a moment, feeling the familiar weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders. It was exactly the kind of situation he had tried to avoid for 5 years, but he could not walk away, not when people needed help. Now, I remember why I became a pilot in the first place, he said. To help people. Commander Yerkes placed one of his 4 hands on Tay's shoulder. Then you will come with me to the Stellar Dawn. Tay nodded. Yes, I'll help you get your people home. As they prepared to leave for the orbit, Tay looked back at his fellow workers one last time. They were all staring at him with new understanding. was someone completely different from what they had imagined. The silent mechanic was about to become something much more important. He was about to become the pilot who would save 50,000 lives. The stellar dawn was enormous. As Commander Yerkes' shuttle approached the damaged cruiser, Tay could see the full extent of the ship that would soon be under his control. It was over 2 kilometers long, with multiple decks and sections that housed 50,000 military personnel and civilians. But he could also see the damage from whatever battle had brought them here. Large sections of the hull were blackened and torn. Several of the main engine pods were dark and lifeless. Emergency lights blinked along the damaged areas where repair crews were working desperately to keep the ship functional. It was clear that the stellar dawn was barely holding together. The Devourers hit us hard, Commander Yerkes explained as they entered the main docking bay. We lost most of our pilot corps in the first attack. The survivors are exhausted, and some are badly injured. Tay studied the damage through the shuttle's windows. How many enemy ships? 16 Devourer vessels? They use swarm tactics, attacking from multiple directions at once. Our pilots had never faced anything like them before. But you escaped, barely. Admiral Voss ordered a retreat when it became clear we could not win, but the navigation systems were damaged during our escape. And we've been drifting for 3 days. The docking bay was huge, with dozens of smaller ships and shuttles parked in organized rows. But Tay noticed that many of the parking spaces were empty, and some of the remaining vessels showed battle damage. The pilots who had brought the stellar dawn to safety had paid a heavy price. As they disembarked from the shuttle, Tay was greeted by Admiral Voss herself. She was tall and elegant, with the blue skin and silver hair typical of Centaurians. Her uniform was crisp and clean, but Tay could see the exhaustion in her eyes. "Lieutenant Commander Kim Tay," she said, extending her hand. "Commander Yerkes has told me remarkable things about your abilities." "Just Tay, please," he replied, shaking her hand. "I'm no longer active military." "Perhaps not," Admiral Voss said, "but right now, you may be the only thing standing between 50,000 people and certain death." She led him through the corridors of the ship, and Tay was impressed by what he saw. Despite the damage, the crew was working efficiently to keep everything running. Engineers hurried past, carrying replacement parts, medical teams moved injured, personnel to treatment areas, and communication officers coordinated with the other ships in the small fleet. "The situation is simple," Admiral Voss explained as they walked. "We need to reach Federation space, but our navigation computers are offline. Manual navigation is possible, but it requires a pilot with extensive experience in long-range space travel. What about your surviving pilots?" Tay asked. "They're good people, but most of them are trained for fighter operations or short-range missions. None of them have experience navigating a ship this size across interstellar distances." They reached the main bridge, and Tay stopped in amazement. The command center was enormous, with dozens of workstations and display screens showing every aspect of the ship's operations. Officers from multiple species worked at their stations, monitoring everything from life support to weapon systems. But what caught Tay's attention was the pilot's station at the front of the bridge. It was empty, its screens dark, and its controls covered with protective plastic. No one had been qualified to sit there since the battle 3 days ago. "That would be your station," Admiral Voss said, following his gaze. Tay approached the pilot's console and examined the controls. Like the shuttle, the basic layout was familiar, but the complexity was far beyond anything he had flown before. This was not just a ship. It was a small city in space, with thousands of systems that all had to work together perfectly. "I'll need time to familiarize myself with the ship's systems," he said. "How much time?" Tay considered the question carefully. A ship this size normally required months of training before a pilot could operate it safely. But they did not have months. They probably did not have days. 6 hours, he said finally. Admiral Voss looked surprised. 6 hours? Are you certain that's enough? It will have to be, Tay replied. The longer we stay here, the more likely it is that the Devourers will find us again. The next 6 hours were the most intensive of Tay's life. He worked with the ship's chief engineer, a friendly alien named Kelth, who had tentacles instead of arms and could operate multiple control panels simultaneously. Together, they went through every system on the ship, from the massive fusion engines To the delicate sensor arrays, the main problem is power distribution, Kelth explained, his tentacles dancing across a diagnostic panel. The Devourers damaged several of our main power conduits. We're running on backup systems for about 30% of the ship. Tay studied the power flow diagrams on the main display. Can we reroute power from non-essential systems? We've already done that. We're operating at minimum power for life, support, and basic systems. What about the weapons systems? Do we need them operational during the journey? Kelth's large eyes blinked in surprise. You want to shut down the weapons? If we run into the Devourers again, weapons won't save us, Tay said, but extra power for the engines might help us outrun them. It was a bold suggestion, and Admiral Voss had to approve it personally. But after reviewing Tay's analysis, she agreed. The weapons systems were shut down, and their power was redirected to the engines and navigation systems. The effect was immediate. The ship's performance improved significantly, and several systems that had been running on emergency power returned to normal operation. More importantly, Tay now had full control over the ship's movement and navigation. Impressive, Kelth said, watching the improved readings on his displays. Most pilots would never think to sacrifice weapons for mobility. Most pilots haven't fought Devourers before, Tay replied. Speed and maneuverability are more important than firepower against them. As the 6th hour approached, Admiral Voss returned to the bridge with disturbing news. Long-range sensors have detected movement at the edge of the system, she announced. Multiple ships heading in our direction. The Devourers, someone asked. Most likely, they must have followed our trail here. Tay looked up from the pilots, a station where he had been running final system checks. How long until they arrive? For hours, maybe 5 if we're lucky. Then we leave now, Tay said, settling into the pilot's seat for the first time. As his hands touched the controls, Tay felt a familiar sensation wash over him. It was the feeling of connection with the ship, the moment when pilot and vessel became a single entity. The Stellar Dawn was huge and complex, but he could sense its personality through the controls. It was a proud ship built for exploration and discovery, not war. But it was also strong and determined, willing to carry its crew to safety no matter what dangers lay ahead. All stations report ready, Admiral Voss announced from her command chair. Navigation plot is laid in, the navigation officer reported. Engineering shows all systems green, Kelth added. Tay took a deep breath and placed his hands on the flight controls. Around him, the bridge fell silent as 50,000 people waited to see if the quiet mechanic from a mining world could really save them all. Stellar Dawn, departing orbit, Tay announced. Destination, Federation space. Estimated travel time, 18 hours. The great ship began to move, slowly at first, then with increasing speed as Tay brought the engines to full power. Behind them, the small mining world grew smaller and disappeared into the darkness. Ahead lay the vast emptiness of space and the long journey home. But Tay was not worried about the journey. For the first time in 5 years, he was doing what he was born to do. He was flying among the stars, carrying people to safety, and it felt like coming home. The journey to Federation space should have taken 18 hours. It took 12. Tay guided the Stellar Dawn through hyperspace with a skill that amazed everyone on the bridge. He found routes that the navigation computers had marked as impossible, cutting through gravitational fields and around stellar phenomena in ways that saved hours of travel time. More importantly, he kept them hidden from the Devourer ships that were hunting them. How did you know about that shortcut through the Nexus Nebula? Admiral Voss asked as they emerged from hyperspace near a Federation patrol station. Experience, Tay replied, his hands still steady on the controls, despite 12 hours of continuous flying. I've flown through that region before. The nebula looks dangerous on sensors, but there are safe passages if you know where to look. The Federation patrol ships moved to escort them, and Tay finally allowed himself to relax. They had made it, 50,000 people were safe, and the Stellar Dawn would live to fight another day. But as the ship docked at the main Federation station, Admiral Voss made an announcement that surprised everyone. Lieutenant Commander Kim Tay, she said formally, by the authority granted to me by the Federation Council, I hereby offer you the rank of Captain and permanent command of the Stellar Dawn. The bridge fell silent. A promotion from civilian status directly to captain was almost unheard of in Federation history. But after what they had witnessed during the past day, no one questioned the decision. "Thank you, Admiral," Tay said, "but I have a different request." "What do you need?" "I want to return to the mining world. My friends are still there, and I think I can help them become something more than just workers." Admiral Voss looked puzzled. "You want to go back to that small planet, after everything that's happened here?" "Yes," Tay said firmly. "Those people have potential that no one has ever recognized. Give me the resources to train them, and I'll give you the best pilots in the galaxy." It was an unusual request, but Admiral Voss had learned to trust Tay's judgment. Within a week, a Federation training facility was established on the mining world. Tay returned as promised, but not alone. He brought with him instructors, equipment, and most importantly, a belief that ordinary people could do extraordinary things. Parkman was the first to volunteer for pilot training. "If Tay can learn to fly ships like that, maybe I can too," he said. Lehanna joined the navigation program, using her natural intelligence to master the complex mathematics of interstellar travel. Choi Young discovered that his understanding of engines made him an excellent flight engineer. Even Overseer Cleef was impressed by the transformation. The humans, who had once been simple miners, were now operating sophisticated spacecraft with confidence and skill. More importantly, they were happy. They had found purpose beyond just surviving from day to day. "I don't understand it," Cleth admitted to Tay one day. "How did you know they had this potential?" "Because I recognized something in them that I once had in myself," Tay replied. "The desire to be more than what others expect you to be." Within 6 months, the mining world had become known throughout the Federation as a training center for exceptional pilots. Students came from dozens of worlds to learn from the teachers who had once been forgotten workers. The small colony that had been ignored by the galaxy was now one of the most important facilities in Federation space. But Tay's greatest achievement was not the training facility or the famous pilots it produced. It was the change he brought to the people themselves. Parkman, who had once been resigned to a life of endless mining, was now an instructor teaching others to fly. Lehan Ed had become one of the Federation's leading experts on navigation through dangerous space. Choi Young was designing new engines that made ships faster and more efficient, and Tay himself had found peace. He still served as captain of the Stellar Dawn when the Federation needed him for important missions, but his home was the small world where he had once hidden from his past. Every night he climbed to the observation deck, but now he was not alone. His students joined him there, learning to read the stars and plan routes through the vast darkness of space. "Do you ever regret coming back here?" Lehanna asked him one evening as they watched a training flight practice formation flying. "Never," Tay replied. "This is where I belong, not because I'm hiding from something, but because I'm building something." The story of the silent mechanic who saved 50,000 lives spread throughout the galaxy, but for Tay, the real victory was much smaller and more personal. It was the sight of his friends learning to fly, the sound of laughter in the corridors that had once been filled only with the noise of mining equipment, and the knowledge that he had helped people discover their own potential. The Vorthok still ran the mining operations, but they were no longer the most important thing on the planet. The quantum crystals they extracted were valuable, but the pilots trained in the Federation facility were priceless. The small world that had once been forgotten was now essential to the defense of the galaxy years later. When historians wrote about the war against the Devourers, they would note that the turning point came when humanity joined the fight in significant numbers. They would write about the brave pilots who flew impossible missions and the innovative tactics that saved countless lives. But they might not mention that it all started with one man who chose to break his silence when people needed help. They might not realize that the greatest victories sometimes begin in the smallest places. With the quietest heroes, Tay never became famous in the way that some military leaders did. His name was known among pilots and naval officers, but most civilians had never heard of him. That suited him perfectly. He had never wanted fame or recognition. He had only wanted to help people and to find a place where he belonged. On the observation deck of the training facility, surrounded by his students and friends, Captain Kim Tay had found exactly what he was looking for. He was home among the stars, teaching others to find their own way through the darkness. The silent mechanic had become something much more important. He had become a teacher, a leader, and a friend. And in doing so, he had proven that the most extraordinary people are often the ones who seem most ordinary, waiting quietly for the moment when their true abilities are needed. The galaxy was a safer place because one man had chosen to speak up when it mattered most. And in a small training facility on a former mining world, new generations of pilots were learning that they too could become more than anyone ever expected them to be. The legend had been born not in a single moment of heroism, but in the daily choice to help others reach for the stars.